Thank you for the introduction, and hello everyone. Thanks you all for being here. So today, as I mentioned, I'm going to show the main part of the postdoc project that I was conducting here within one project. You can see the logo on top left. It's the European project on bio-inspired hierarchical materials. And my supervisor was Andrea Colombi, and the experimental parts that I will show you here were conducted mainly with the help of Henrik and Bao. And the title of my talk is Elastic Wave Control in Reticulated Plates Utilizing the Schwarz Primitive Cells. But because my talk is within the realm of metamaterials, I thought it's good to just briefly mention what are metamaterials, how they have been exploited in the past couple of decades. So metamaterials are engineered structures that can show exotic properties that cannot be seen in the nature, and that has allowed physicists and engineers to manipulate structures and get like exotic features, among which I can mention like negative effective parameters. They have been used for cloaking and invisibility. They have also been used for rainbow trapping, mode conversion, and also energy harvesting, to name a few. But the main feature and the most interesting feature of metamaterials is what we call the band gap. And for that, I thought it would be nice to just briefly explain what is band gap and what are the mechanisms behind generation of band gap. So basically, band gap is a frequency range where the propagation of the waves is forbidden. And there are two main mechanisms behind this feature. The first one is Bragg scattering. Bragg scattering, as you can see, happens when you have like periodic arrangement of your scatters in the medium. And if you look into the modes that propagate in the medium, you will see, for instance, these are the modes that propagate. And you see that a range opens which I mark by gray, and you will see that there's no propagation, there is no modes in that region. That means that there is no propagation. And what I'm showing here in this diagram, I have to mention, is what we call a dispersion curve. And dispersion curve is what shows us the relationship between the frequency and the wave number, and that gives us a lot of information. The other, but I have to say that there is one thing about the Bragg scattering, and that's the fact that the periodicity, like that A that you can see in the figure, has to be in the order of the wavelengths, which is not very desirable if we have like very long wavelengths. There's another mechanism which is called local resonance, and local resonance is basically when you add some resonators to your host medium, like these dots you can see. You can imagine them like rods that are attached to a thin plate, and this can also open a band gap, as you can also see in the dispersion relation, with a very different shape. But you see that if you imagine this is the mode that propagates in a bare plate, you introduce a resonator that resonates at the frequency of omega 0 to the plate, and you see at the intersection is what we call a hybridization. And these two modes diverge, and then you see a range where, again, marked by gray, you see that there's no propagation in this region. And this is very interesting because the scatters can be put in a sub-wavelength regime. So it's not like the other one. And also, you don't need to really have periodicity for the scatters. They can be distributed randomly, and you get the same, more or less the same feature. Okay, now back to my work. So when I came to ETH, as I said, my postdoc was within the POEM project. So we had the idea of using a bio-inspired structure, and our source of inspiration was the bone, like human bone, because in my last postdoc I had worked with dolphin bone, and so I had access to this data. Where I show you here like 3 orthogonal views of this is actually a sample of human bone. You can see like how anisotropic it is and how disordered it is. So we took a very small part of this, and so basically we stack these orthogonal images on top of each other, and we build a structure like the gray one that you see here. And I spent a lot of time to mesh this structure, which is not at all obvious, and I succeeded, which is the one which is not very visible. But And the idea, if you think a little bit about the previous work that has been done in our group by Julia, that used the lattices. So here in Julia's structure, you see that there are like there are lattices and there are truss elements that are attached to each other in an ordered way. But here there are like, you can also consider these as trusses, but they are not connected regularly. It's a random structure. But it turned out that running the simulations on these and also manipulating the structures, which is what we needed for the method devices that we wanted to build, was not a doable task. I also looked into like a simplified structure where instead of really considering all these variation in the thickness along one truss, I just said, okay, 0 or 1, either bone or not, voxel by voxel. And I built these kind of structures which were easier to run simulations, but still not easy enough to manipulate. Okay, but we had all these ideas of bone porosity, and we looked a little bit into the literature, and we came across these interesting surfaces, which are called terribly periodic minimal surfaces, known as TPMS. And it's a family of 6 members. You can see they have there are 6 different forms. They have 6 different forms, and they have an explicit equation that defines the surface. And when I looked a little bit into literature, I found out that the mechanics and the statics of these structures have been exploited, but they have not really been used in wave propagation and dynamics, especially in the metamaterial domain. And interestingly, when we picked our unit cell, which is the first one on top left, it's like it has also been discovered in nature. So in a sea urchin skeletal, if we look into the one platelet cross section, we see that it resembles a lot to the first one on the left, the one that I start to work with when we arrange it in 3D. Et voila. And that's where my main part of the postdoc started. So we picked this unit cell, which is known as Schwarz primitive cell, which was designed by a German mathematician, and it has the explicit equation as you see here. So you can build the surface basically based on the equation. But the first thing to understand about this unit cell is the dynamics, like what are the modes that propagate in these structures. So to do that, we started first of all by doing the eigenfrequency analysis in console and applying periodic boundary conditions. So we have only this one cell, and we apply periodic boundary conditions to 2D, and we run an eigenfrequency analysis, and we find the modes that propagate in the structure. Again, this is a dispersion relation. We see the relationship between the frequency and real part of the wave number. And console gives me all these black curves. As you see, it's a big mess. And it's not really, you cannot know what is what modes are really there, which one is which mode, which polarization. So it's a bit complicated. But the complementary study that can make this understanding this curve a bit better is to basically build an equivalent of this, of application of these to the periodic boundary condition and run time domain simulations. So if I want to simulate the periodic boundary conditions in 2D, it means that I have to take my cell and replicate it in 2D and build a plate, which is this one. And here the plate is 30 by 30 unit cells. So here I have my plate. From one side, I put the source on one side of the plate, and I excite in my time domain simulation. I excite only so this is the plate, and I excite only the out of plane mode. And then, along the direction of propagation, I measure equidistantly the displacement, doing the 2D FFT method, applying the 2D FFT method, and this data, I get what is shown here in the colored background. And you see that now it's clear. Now we see that there are 2 modes, the orange modes, that are propagating. They fit perfectly with what console had found for us. And interestingly, you see in this range, there is no mode. Just look now just look into the color thing. There is no mode, there is nothing orange in this range. That means that there is a band gap for the out of plane mode. But we can also verify this with other type of investigations. So that would be to look into the imaginary part of the wave number instead of the real part. And we see that indeed there is a form of the band gap that is appearing, and it's also in the same frequency range that we found there. And we can also look into the transmissibility, meaning that I have the data of the wave propagation along this direction. So to look into transmissibility basically means that to take the ratio of the amplitude of the wave measured at the end of the structure and at the beginning, that gives you an estimation of how much energy has been transmitted. And if you look into transmissibility, you see that there's a drop at the same frequency range that is the frequency range of band. And also, we can also make sure, actually based on console data, we can also make sure that this is indeed the out-of-plane mode. This is just proof further that indeed this is an out-of-plane mode. So if you look into the mode shapes as very marked by circle and rectangle, you see that indeed it's the out-of-plane mode that is excited at these frequencies. Okay, so in this slide, I showed you for the Schwarz primitive cell, we have a band gap. It's the out-of-plane mode, and it's a Bragg type. Because you see, if you remember the form, it's a Bragg type. Also, the imaginary part of the wave number tells you it's a Bragg type. So these three conclusions are from this to be taken from this slide. But the thing is that in this slide, everything I showed you is numerical. So the next step is go into the lab and test if we can really recover this band gap experimentally. To do that, again, we need to build a plate. And because we always 3D print our structures, we want to come up with the smallest size of the plate that can recover the band gap range. To understand how many cells I need to replicate in two directions, I started with a frequency domain analysis. And it turned out that when I have 10 by 6 unit cells along Z and Y directions, if I look into the transmissibility of such a structure, I get the black curve in the right figure. And you see indeed in the transmissibility there is a drop. And I marked by pink color the band gap that is predicted from the previous study that I showed you. So from the console and from the time simulation, we know that our band gap is within this range, marked by pink, and our numerical data also verifies that. So being happy with this size of the prototype, we ordered the prototype to a 3D printing company, and we had like this limit, these restrictions in the maximum size that we can print. So we printed 2 prototypes. Actually, we divided these into 5 by 6, and then we glued it together. So this experiment is what I did with the help of Henrik. And here, so as you see in the experimental setup, we have the prototype. We put it on the shaker, we excite the out-of-plane mode, and by using a laser LDV on the other side of the plate, we measure the velocity along the structure. And looking into the transmissibility, I get what is shown here in blue, and you see again that the band gap is very, very covered. And I can also look into the imaginary part of the wave number and see that indeed it has the form of a Bragg, and the frequency range is also nice. Okay. So up to now, we understand the dynamic of the cell, the spatial relation, numerically and experimentally. Okay, now we can start and design some metastructures. The first metastructure that I designed is called a metabarrier. Metabarrier is defined basically as a region or an area within your host medium which is protected from the propagation at a given frequency. So to do that, I started to do a parametric analysis by removing the mass from the structure. So in the curved part of the cell, I designed like some spheres. I remove these spheres from the mass, and then I get something like this, which is very porous. And I looked into the dispersion relation of the two and compared the two. So the blue one on the left curve, the blue curves are the dispersion relation for the barium itself, and the red curves are the dispersion relation for the porous one. And with blue and red highlighted region, I highlighted the bandgap area. So you see that when we remove the mass, the modes move toward lower frequencies, but the two band gaps still overlap. So we leverage these two features, the fact that the modes shift to a lower frequency and the band gaps overlap. We leverage this and embed an area within the bare plate where the mass is removed from the cell. Okay, let's see how the performance of such a metabarrier is. So, if we excite the plate, the out-of-plane mode on the plate, and we look into the transmissibility at the two positions marked by blue and red stars, we get the blue and red curves here for the transmissibility. The blue one is nothing new. What I've been showing you so far is that it marks the bandgap region for the bare unit cell. Why? Because until the location of the blue star, the wave has only propagated in the bare plate. But when it enters the meta area, if we measure at that point, we see that indeed the bandgap is now widened and deepened. So we increase the frequency range where that area is protected. And this starting frequency of this red region is exactly the starting frequency of the bandgap of that modified unit cell. We can also look into the performance of the structure by exciting the plate at this frequency, like 1.85 kilohertz. Why? Because at this frequency, we expect the propagation in the bare plate, but it falls within the bandgap of the modified area. So we expect the propagation within the bare plate, but nothing in the meta area. And this is a snapshot that shows actually, you see that the waves are indeed propagating, but nothing goes into the meta area. And I also have a video which might be true. So you see that the sinusoidal wave is coming, arrives to the metabarrier region, it gets reflected back, and nothing can go into that area. Okay. So still staying within the same idea, like the metabarrier, but changing the unit cell and how we modify the unit cell to accomplish such an idea, is that we move forward and we look into the case where we add the masses to the unit cell. So in the same regions where I had removed the mass previously, I now mark this region and locally increase the value of mass density at these areas. And again, if you look into the dispersion relation for the blue and the red curves, we see indeed that again the modes are shifting to a lower frequency and the two bandgaps overlap. And same idea, if we measure the transmissibility before and at the end of the meta area, we get these two curves for the transmissibility, and we see again that indeed the frequency range of this forbidden propagation band is increased, like as you see by the red curve, and it's also deepened. So we have a higher attenuation and in a wider range. All right, so this was the idea of metabarrier. What I showed you here so far was that when I modified the cells within a given area, it was like the same modification, right? For instance, I removed the mass with a specific value and I replicated the same thing. But next, we wanted to look into apply a kind of grading to these variations that we apply to the modified unit cell. So instead of like looking only at the given porosity, we start from a small porosity and we gradually increase the porosity on the cell. And each time we do a parametric analysis. So each time we look how this lower out-of-plane mode changes by increasing the porosity. And that's what I show on the left, top left figure, where you see that indeed by increasing the porosity, the modes shift toward lower frequency. So the idea that we wanted to try here was to build a lens. This is a well-known lens in the literature, which is called Lundberg lens, and it has this equation for the refractive index profile that you see on top. So n is basically the refractive index profile, small r is the radius of each layer where you apply your modifications, and the big R is the full size of your lens. So knowing how the refractive index profile has to change with distance from the center on one hand, and knowing the variation of the phase velocity based on the phase velocity knowing the variations of the wave velocity as a function of the porosity. On the other hand, we can design our lens. So here I show you how the phase velocity changes as the porosity changes. So we know these two, and then we can design our lens. So we know how much with the distance from the radius, the pore radius should change. And that's what I plotted here. So here we have this square shape, and then it's layer by layer. So each layer, the cells have a different porosity. So from blue to red, we go from high porosity. So the outer cells basically are very similar to the bare cell, and as we move towards the center, or I should do like this, as we move towards the center, the porosity increases. And all is designed based on that equation. So we have this modified area, we have this modified porosity based on the grading idea, and we embed it within a bare plate. So the area marked by a white line is basically the lens area, and the outside is the bare plate. And you see indeed that when the waves enter the meta area, they indeed bend, and then they focus on the other side of the meta area. And if we look into the value of displacement, we see that indeed there is a focusing achieved. Okay. So next step is to validate the lens experimentally. This was a very challenging part. So some of you might have seen this in my office. And so this is my sample. So again, because we don't want to 3D print a very big thing, basically we consider only the lens area, but only consider only the left half. Because if we can recover the bending in half, we can just mirror it and then see a full thing. That's what we did. So basically, this is only half of the lens that we had it 3D printed, and this experiment were done with the help of Bob. So again, we had like smaller samples, we glued them together, and we built the sample, and then we experimentally looked if we could recover the bending of the waves. So this is our experimental setup. We have the lens prototype on top of this absorbent sponge. You see some ugly Play-Doh that we like. This was not at all easy, because every time we ran experiments, we saw that some molds from the edges of this plate, this metal plate that is attached to the shaker, they go into the structure. So they ruin everything. So we had to make these parts heavy so that they don't move. So, and with the equipment that we had, it was only Play-Doh that we found in the lab. So we just played a little bit with that and attached on the side. And it turned out that if we look into the experimental data, so this is basically the same thing, I just mirrored it to see the bending clearly. And you see that also experimentally, we could recover bending of the out of plane mode based on the Schwarz primitive cell. Okay, so I showed you today the numerical and experimental validation of the dispersion relation of the Schwarz primitive cell. I showed you that there is a band gap, and it's for the out of plane mode. I showed you two meta barriers, one on the basis of the increased porosity and one on the basis of added mass. Both worked very well. We validated that only numerically. And then we did also a graded meta area, which is a Lüneburg lens. And I showed you both numerically and experimentally the validation of this structure. I mean, I didn't want to be too long, but so I didn't show today, but I built also other types of lens, which are a bit different. The grading is a bit different. And this work is under review now. And the work that we are doing now is actually a recent collaboration that we started at the university in Italy. And we are looking into the grading of the similar cells, but radially. And we want to see if we can spatially attenuate the waves at different frequencies. So I think that's it.